Welcome to the Physicians Committee's Mission Critical Update with Dr. Neal Barnard. And thank you for joining us today, November 6th, 2020. I'm Betsy Wason, PCRM's Vice President of Development, and we are so glad that you have taken a time out from the election situation to hear about the latest news from PCRM. So we're going to run with that election theme today and talk about what PCRM aims to accomplish in the next 4 years, regardless of who is in the White House. Our mission is bipartisan, and it will be no less urgent once a winner is announced. So we'll hear from Dr. Barnard and two of our staff members who are very involved in pushing PCRM strategic goals forward. Kristie Sullivan and Jill Eckart are back with us today to give us some very exciting updates. We always want to make it easy for you to support PCRM's work, and PCRM members are very creative in their giving. So many of you are making gifts from your IRAs, you're making stock donations, you're dedicating your birthdays on Facebook and encouraging others to support this work as well. And we're also looking forward to a few special gifting opportunities that are coming at us before the end of the year, including Giving Tuesday on December 1st and our 35th anniversary celebration that's happening Sunday, December 6th. So to speak with someone about a donation, you can call us at 202-527-7304, or you can always go online. Our webpage is open for giving and taking support 24/7, and that is PCRM.org. So every dollar makes a difference to the animals and the people that we're all partnering to help. So thank you. So for today's event, please use the chat box. Let us know where you are joining us from. And when you type a comment, please choose all attendees and panelists from the drop-down menu. And that way everyone can see your messages and your chats. Before I turn the event over to Dr. Barnard, I'd like to play a video that we created this week. There's a special installation in Washington, D.C. that is a memorial for the victims of COVID-19. And sometimes Zoom videos don't work all that well. This one's very short. We have our fingers crossed and hope that we can show you this right now. Anne-Marie, go ahead, please play our video.
I'm Dr. Neal Barnard. I'm here in Washington, D.C. at this special exhibit honoring those lives lost to COVID-19. The death toll continues to mount. Masks, social distancing, they're as important as ever. But we need more. As soon as the pandemic emerged in China, it was clear that certain underlying health conditions made COVID-19 a killer. Diabetes, hypertension, obesity. People with these conditions were dying much more rapidly from the virus than people without them. Every policymaker knows this, but they're doing effectively nothing about it. So the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine is calling on policymakers, whether they're local, state, national, international, to make some noise. Let people know. When it comes to diabetes, hypertension, obesity, it can't be business as usual. It's a matter of life and death.
Dr. Barnard, let me hand the event over to you now.
Yeah, I have to say, when you see that installation, it is so terribly powerful. It's a little bit like the when you look at Arlington National Cemetery or the World War II cemeteries in Europe, where you see grave after grave after grave. And in this case, I hate to say it, but it's not stopping. Things are welling up much worse. So that said, thank you for your support, for everybody who's on this call. Thank you for your support of the work that we're doing. It's critically important now. Please do jump in the chat box. Let us know where you're calling from, because we love hearing from you. And in turn, we're going to ask you to spread the word in your community, with your family and friends, with your social network companions, and anyone you can. Let me share my screen, because there's some images that I do want to to highlight, if I may. Let me see if I can do this. Okay. I don't need to tell you, it's a very divided time, has been for a long time, and that is completely understandable. However, there are a couple of things about our work that have to be acknowledged. First of all, we are a 501c3 charity, and what that means is that we don't get involved in elections. We can get involved in battles over legislation. We can push bills, we can push laws, we can litigate, we can sue people, we can do all that stuff, but we can't get involved in political elections, so we don't ally with the political party. We're not allowed to. But I have to say, it's not just that we're not allowed to, it's our job to work with whoever is in the White House, whoever is in Congress, who's ever in local governments and in state governments, and we do that a lot. And so we have worked over the years in many ways in a collegial and diplomatic way. And I often think of Kristie Sullivan's work, you're going to hear from Kristie in a little bit, where she has found such wonderful ways to work with people that, frankly, you might not necessarily want to have lunch with. I'm talking about people who make pesticides and people who regulate hideously cruel animal tests. But the team is there to work with whoever has the decision-making power over the fate of the animals used in tests, and to work with them to, frankly, to pry the animals out of their hands so that we can find ways to not only do science more ethically, but also make it more useful in our scientific process. But of these, obviously, ethics is always the most important foundation. And we do work collegially with who's ever in power locally, state government, federal government, and internationally. But at the same time, we're also not afraid or hesitant to litigate when we need to and to push really hard. But there's, apart from those things, apart from diplomacy and sometimes arm wrestling and fighting, to tell you the truth, our biggest job is education. This is Noah Gattel, who brought members of Congress and their staffers together in this briefing. What he's demonstrating is a way of teaching trauma care. And what we're doing is working to get the military to change its training practices to give animals a break. And there it's really a question of imparting knowledge that people may not otherwise have. And it's completely independent of which side of the aisle they're on. And sometimes the real power brokers are not the people whose names are on the ballot. It's the people who work with them in their legislative offices. And these are the legislative aides. In some cases, they are really experienced. In other cases, they are straight out of school. Sometimes they're brand new in Washington. So we bring them together, sometimes they will go to these hot dog and burger things on Capitol Hill. So we will have the veggie dog contests and things like that they come to. And then, of course, as you know, we're working around the country to really push an educational message in all the different states about the need for governments to understand what's happening, not just a long term with animals and with health, but short term with COVID right now. This is EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, who is working, as you see Kristie on the right there, announcing the future end to the use of mammals in EPA policy. So we're continuing to work with this administration. We'll work with the next administration on this. And then we work with state governments very, very hard. This is when we were able to stop, in California, the sale of animal-tested cosmetics, which is an enormous step forward because as California goes, so goes the rest of the country. And this was just really the nail in the coffin of animal testing for cosmetic products. And the fact that we were able to get so much support from people of every political party really just is such a validation of the work that we're doing. So let me unshare and come back. I want to say, what does this mean for where we are now? Where we are now is, frankly, the world and the United States in particular are still in the throes of a major pandemic. It's ramping up now, and it's going to get worse. Late November, December, January, February, somewhere in there, a vaccine will hopefully become available. But in the meantime, we have got to work. We're continuing our work to get animals off the plate. It's especially urgent now because if a meat-based diet makes diabetes worse and hypertension worse, that makes COVID all the more deadly. So our work has got special urgency to it. We are exploring and implementing new ways to reach people. And that's, of course, Zoom and every other platform and new webinars and all kinds of things, because our message cannot wait. And we have to be as creative as the virus is. It's finding new ways to attack us, and we're finding ways to fight back. Among the most important of these is looking at animal testing in new ways. Animal testing is cruel. It, by definition, focuses on a species that is not the species that we want to be looking at. We want to be looking at human health. But it also is slowing things down, and scientists understand that. It's slowing down the pursuit of vaccines, and when animals are used in batch testing of vaccines for safety, it's an old-fashioned method. So our team is continuing to fight not just for healthier diets, getting the animals off the plates, but also getting animals off the labs, because when we move to more modern methods, it's more ethical, it's more compassionate, it's also a whole lot quicker, and it relates to human biology that much better. So thanks to all of you for supporting our work. There's a lot more to be done, and Kristie and Jill are going to tell you more about it. Back to you, Betsy.
Thank you, Dr. Barnard. And it really is uplifting to see all the chats that happen during these mission critical events, and this people joining us from all over the United States and the world today. We've got Glenna in Alexandria, right across the river from us, and Hans in Berlin. Thank you for joining us. Yannick and Agna from London. Fred, hello, in Miami Beach, and Lisa Carlin. It's nice to see your name pop up in the chat box. Lisa's a friend and a Food for Life instructor, and we're glad to have you with us. So let me introduce our next presenter. We're welcoming back Kristie Sullivan. Kristie is PCRM's Vice President of Research Policy, and she's going to give us a look ahead at PCRM's priorities for the administration that takes us through the next 4 years. So Kristie, what, if anything, will PCRM be changing up?
Sorry, I had to put myself off mute. Well, thanks, Betsy, and thanks, Neal, for the introduction, and good to talk with you all again. We've been watching and waiting this week, even her, to see the outcome of the election, because state and federal government laws and regulations can have a big impact on how animals are treated. But first, I want to tell you what else I've been doing this week. I've talked before about our involvement with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is a big multinational standard-setting organization, and they set chemical guidelines for all the member countries, which are in the dark blue, basically the developed countries, and increasingly are having a lot of influence over the more developing countries as well. We've led a global group of organizations interested in replacing animal testing from every major region to engage with OECD for a little more than 10 years. And to tell you the truth, we had to fight to get to that table. But this year, I was invited to speak at the Global Forum on the Environment related to chemicals management. It was virtual, of course, and most of the speakers over the 2 days talked about regulating toxic chemicals and with a focus on helping developing countries, which in some cases don't have laws governing these chemicals. But our concern is that as developing countries increase chemical regulation, they will conduct more animal testing. This is already happening in some cases. So in my talk, I highlighted how avoiding animal testing and replacing it with non-animal alternatives saves time and resources, allowing for better protection of human health and the environment. Now, hundreds of delegates from all over the world are aware of this possibility of avoiding animal testing and the training that we can offer them to do it. This week and last week, I also attended 2 other OECD meetings and advocated for replacements for several animal tests. including a really tough meeting last Monday where we were arguing for 3 hours straight with certain country delegates determined to stand in the way of progress that we're trying to make. We've been able to increase testing guidelines and tools that use non-animal techniques at the OECD from 5 to 28 in the last several years. Getting up for these meetings, which happened on Paris time, was tough, but it is worth it. It's worth it because without this work every day pushing OECD to adopt replacements for animal tests, we would not have seen as much progress as we have. Just last year, as Neal just mentioned, EPA announced it was committing to completely eliminating mammalian testing by 2035. They felt they could make this commitment because they now have test guidelines from the OECD that replace some of the tests that are required by EPA regulations. And they know that there are more on the way. There is a list of methods EPA publishes on its website that companies can use instead of animals. And the list is almost entirely these OECD non-animal test guidelines that we've helped to put into place. This is Dr. Esther Hagebrooks and I with EPA Administrator Wheeler when he made that announcement. So of course, this happened under the current administration. But the fact is the EPA is a bit like a battleship. It takes a while to turn it. We've been making progress under both Republican and Democratic administrations. So no matter who's in the White House, if you've been following our work for a long time and you have a heart for animals, you know that animals are not always held in the highest regard, either by Republicans or Democrats. We need to fight no matter what to help them. As a tax-exempt charity, we of course do not endorse political candidates, but several of our allies were reelected to the House and the Senate, including Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, who's advocated for animals in laboratories in several different ways. Republican Ken Calvert from California, a representative with whom we've worked to increase funding for non-animal toxicology development, and Democrat in the House as well, Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, who's been advocating for changes in how drugs are tested at the Food and Drug Administration. And we're happy to be able to continue to work with them on these issues in the coming years. We often work with the leadership of different legislative committees. We still don't know who that leadership is going to be because they'll reassess all of the committees and reform them. So we'll be working to determine our strategy over the next few months. So related to the current pandemic, many thousands of animals are being killed to research treatments and vaccines. So we have been pushing NIH and FDA and asking Congress to push NIH and FDA to support only human relevant research techniques. We got some really great news this week. A company called Emulate has announced it has signed a collaborative agreement to supply the Food and Drug Administration with human organs on chips, including lung chips, liver, and intestine chips. These are, as you can see on your screen, they're these very tiny devices that are made up of human cells from different organs, and they can use them to study all kinds of different biological processes. Here, they're going to be undertaking studies for COVID vaccine toxicity and effectiveness, but also brain chips relevant to Alzheimer's disease and other organ chips for other conditions. So we'll be encouraging the FDA to commit to using technologies like these more and moving completely away from animals in the coming years. So what are we going to be doing in the next few years? Agencies can make the decision to prioritize animal-free testing and production. And so we would like them to require alternatives to animal tests and animal-derived materials for testing and production of drugs and vaccines and other medical products. These decisions across a number of different agencies could save millions of animals. We're going to ask them to train the next generation of scientists and doctors with human relevant research and testing methods. The foundation of our organization is making the training of medical and scientific professionals ethical and effective by getting animals out of the equation. We're going to ask them to expand oversight of laboratories and share information on how many animals are used in experiments and tests and how they're used. The administration's this administration's USDA, unfortunately, has completely abdicated responsibility for policing laboratories. Citations for violations have dropped more than 60% between 2017 and 2018. We don't have any information for 2019. The public deserves to know what's happening and how many animals in labs are being killed across the country. And we need to replace those animals, not double down on animal experiments. We need to invest in human relevant research models. Right now, the NIH has released some recent grants that are trying to develop new types of animal tests, and we need to fight against that. And of course, we'll be fighting to make sure the EPA continues to make progress in its commitment to end animal experiments. If we accomplish these things, we can save hundreds of thousands of animals. There's a lot of work to be done, but we can do it with your support. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristie, and for bringing us good news, but you also make it really crystal clear that you are not going to stop fighting no matter what, and no matter who is in the White House, and those animals need our help. Thank you for bringing us that. So our next presenter, you'll also recognize from previous mission critical events. PCRM's Managing Director of Nutrition is Jill Eckart, and she's here with us. She and her team are working on multiple fronts to make plant-based nutrition a priority for healthier people and to stop animals from suffering by way of our forks. So Jill, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It's wonderful to be back with you all. Let me share some slides that also talk about a fight that we will definitely not be giving up as we move forward. So as you know, PCRM has been an active leader in advocating for and bringing about substantial changes to the dietary guidelines for Americans. And whichever administration we have will continue that work. In fact, we're expecting that the 2020-2025 dietary guidelines to be released next month in December. And so leading up to this, I want to just detail for you some of the fight that we have orchestrated over the last several months with the idea that we would be coming together, pulling together similar aggressive and strategic plans for our policy focus areas in the years ahead. PCRM has been hard at work coordinating communications and press releases, campaigns, and testimony to ensure that our experts, your comments, and the science leading up to the report would be heard by the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services. So in May, in preparation for a dietary guidelines meeting on June 17th, as we were waiting on draft report in July, we put this message out. Telling the USDA to ditch the dairy. Let's get rid of it completely. And we anticipated that the guidelines would maintain a good stance on plant-based diets, but we have been worried and continue to be concerned about its confusing stance on dairy. And I know that so many of the people on this call have such a heart for animals and might be, one, surprised as to how cruel the industry is. I know when I started out in this work many years ago, that was new information to me, but you might also be surprised at the problematic health issues that are connected with this, with the dairy industry as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those as we talk about the campaign. So on June 11th, our Director of Nutrition Education, Susan Levin, coordinated testimony for the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Our messaging was simple, that to help keep all Americans healthy, milk consumption should not be recommended. And she called for the USDA to follow the path of evidence-based guidelines and for more diligence around facts and scrutiny against the pressures of industry. And I want to share with you that further, she called out that the most outdated recommendation by the dietary guidelines is its commercially oriented push for Americans to consume dairy. And what may have started out as an attempt to stabilize dairy prices has become a serious health problem for many and has justifiably been criticized as a racist practice for two reasons. First, dairy products are not well digested, if digested at all, by most people who are not white. And further, as the leading source of saturated fat in the diet, dairy products contribute to chronic diseases, including heart disease, prostate cancer, that disproportionately harm or kill people of color. And a few weeks later, the committee released their draft report that we were waiting on, which supported plant-based diets, as we thought they might, in a good way, but did not condone dairy. So our assault on dairy continued. We then broke news on another issue at odds with the guidelines, their saturated fat recommendations and conflicts of interest. The Dairy Management Inc., which maybe you've heard us talk about before, formed a partnership with Taco Bell back in 2012. It's funded by the USDA Managed Dairy Checkoff Program, which collects money from milk producers to promote and boost dairy sales. And then they spend our money, millions of dollars a year, working with fast food restaurants to develop cheesy, high-fat products. So in July, they launched this, the grilled cheese burrito. It has mozzarella, cheddar, pepper jack, and sour cream. And I promise I'm getting back to the dietary guidelines here. Just hang with me here. But it has all this cheese inside. And then it has a layer of cheese grilled around the outside, as you can see over here on the left and the right. And that amounts to 19% of calories from saturated fat. And the dietary guidelines, saturated fat guidelines, are easily busted here within just a few bites. So the question we have is, how can the USDA inform the public of the dangers of dairy while also trying to get the public to buy more of it? And we'll continue to expose these types of conflicts of interest as we move forward. In July, we partnered with PCRM member doctors to co-sign a letter that calls on the USDA and Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that the guidelines indicate that dairy products are unnecessary and warn of their particular health toll on people of color. And in that same month, we held a special episode of our Exam Room Live show asking, do milk and dairy belong in the same category as tobacco and processed meat? And we won't relent on the USDA, and if they don't tell the people, we sure will. In September, as some of you may have been following, we filed a lawsuit against the Food and Drug Administration for failing to respond to a petition that asks the agency to require warning labels, to require cheese manufacturers to add the following warning label here. As you see, dairy cheese contains reproductive hormones that increase breast cancer and mortality risk. And then following on the heels of that, the second week of October, we sponsored these controversial mobile billboards featuring a woman frowning at a glass of milk. They traveled all throughout Washington, D.C. to alert the public that the dietary guidelines for Americans recommend 3 servings of dairy daily, and the link to breast cancer risk there. And as you may have heard, last week, we sponsored litigation out of Tallahassee, Florida. Our Vice President of Legal may have heard from him last Friday on this, but in the first ever legal action of its kind, a new Florida school is challenging the National School Lunch Program's requirement of their milk mandate. So King Charter Schools challenges this requirement that schools offer dairy milk, even though many students, especially students of color, are unable to digest milk due to lactose intolerance. So we are going to continue to organize, call for policy change, and advocate until animal products are not the center of our school meals or dietary guidelines, My Plate. So you'll continue to see aggressive campaigns like the dietary guidelines efforts all this summer that we were rolling out in the year ahead. So just to summarize, we'll be tackling many federal nutrition programs, including the agencies I've mentioned here today, DGA's National School Lunch Program, Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, Food and Drug Administration warnings. And then we'll also be focusing on local policies, and you've probably heard me share about those before, but many of those efforts undergoing now are focused on school lunch, hospital food, CME requirements, so continuing medical education requirements, trying to get more training for doctors on nutrition. And I hope to be able to report progress on those efforts in the spring. We'll also be partnering with major medical organizations on statements supporting plant-based diets. And it's going to be a hard road ahead, working through the industry, and as we've repeated over and over again, the inertia. But with your help and support, together we'll achieve these critical changes. And I just want, before I hand it back over to you, Betsy, I just want to thank everyone for all of our members for never batting an eye when you receive another request to submit comments, whether it's for the dietary guidelines or sign a petition. Many petitions have gone out over the last few years, and to even deliver testimony, which some of you have done as well. So thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to partnering on all these efforts. So sending it back over to you, Betsy.
Oh, thank you so much, Jill, and also for mentioning the role that our members and supporters play in these campaigns, because it really is a partnership, and it's so critical to have those phone calls and the emails and the testimonies happening just to help strengthen our position. And thank you for bringing an update on PCRM's all-out assault on dairy as well. Because dairy has done so much damage, it is doing so much damage, and again, we will not stop until we modernize medicine in this way, saving people and animals. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour, but we want to hear closing remarks from Dr. Barnard, and so let me go ahead and throw it over to you.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Kristie. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Betsy, for bringing this together. I noticed that there was a comment in the chat that I just wanted to address really quickly. And someone's wondering, what difference really does it make about dairy, and why? Why would anybody focus on that if you have a heart for animals, or if you're concerned about health? From a health standpoint, Jill touched on lactose intolerance, which is digestive upset. But for those of you who saw the headlines today about Al Roker being diagnosed with prostate cancer, it's a reminder that it was more than 2 decades ago that Harvard University researchers found the link between dairy products and this terribly aggressive form of cancer. It is a leading form of cancer in men, particularly Black men, but frankly, worldwide, and without regard to demographic groups, it's a huge issue. Earlier this year, links with breast cancer came out, links with ovarian cancer have been known for a long period of time. So we're really talking about life and death from a human standpoint. For people who have a heart for animals, for people who know a little bit about where a glass of milk comes from, just very quickly, cows don't make milk automatically. They are impregnated, and then they're pregnant for 9 months, and then when they give birth, their calves are taken away from them. The male calves are killed for veal because people have a taste for the rubbery muscle tissue of a newborn male calf. And the females are taken away from their mothers and raised in isolation until they're able to be milked. And the way they are impregnated is not with roses and chocolates and Barry Manilow records. They're artificially inseminated. And it's a rather gruesome thing that when you see it done, it makes you not really want to have a bowl of ice cream. And finally, apart from the fact that they're separated from their offspring, and their offspring are killed if they're male, the last thing is the dairy cows themselves are killed. Now that's a surprise. I mean, people who don't want to eat meat because you don't like the idea of killing animals would find that shocking for dairy. Well, in nature, a cow lives about 20 years. On dairy farms, they're killed at about age 4. And that's simply because their milk production starts to slack off, and it's cheaper to artificially inseminate an animal's daughter than it is to keep working with her. So she gets trucked off to the slaughterhouse, is killed, and her daughter will be killed when she's about 4, and her daughter will be killed when she's about 4. So it's a creepy industry, I gotta tell you. So it's a good thing to get rid of it as ASAP. All right, if I haven't cheered you up enough, let me just come back to kind of where we started, and that's our work across all political divides. I was thinking back as Kristie was talking about our work with the EPA. I'll never forget a conversation I had with an EPA administrator years ago. And he was saying, industry is at the table. People who make chemicals, they're at the table. The EPA listens to them. The environmentalists were at the table too. They were pressing for more animal tests in many ways. And this EPA administrator said to me, wait a minute, you people who have a heart for animals, you're not at the table. And I realized, okay, we need to change that. And the way that we change that is by being the scientific experts on better ways to do things. So we made sure that our staff was rich with the information on how to do things in a better way. And during the Clinton administration, we started making a lot of strides. And then in the G.W. Bush administration, we started making more strides. And we discovered that it didn't really matter who was in the White House. What mattered was who were the staffers at the EPA who were in charge of interpreting this information, mostly career staffers. Then in the Obama administration, we finally got a bipartisan bill through Congress called the Lautenberg Act that put the screws to the EPA and said basically, thou shalt implement alternatives. And this was then implemented in the current administration. And in a way, who's ever in the White House doesn't really have a choice. This is the law. And so where are we now? Where we are now is we have made progress, we have made allies, we have made law. And where we are now is we have to be as aggressive and impatient as possible so that these things are implemented. The EPA has a long-term explicit plan, which is fantastic. They are going to get away from animal tests. But the question is, how rapidly are you going to do it? And we have to push as quickly as we possibly can. Our mission is not just limited to the United States, though. Our mission is worldwide, and that's when Kristie was talking about OECD. That is an international consortium to make sure that what happens here is what's going to happen in Japan, is what's going to happen in Europe. We're going to get rid of animal testing in all those places. We've got to work like heck to make it happen. That's exactly what we are doing. And when it comes to nutrition, you heard about what Jill's mentioning, so many things that are bringing nutrition policy forward. And as she's described in prior programs, not just here. The biggest two countries on the planet are China and India. In both countries, westernization is afoot, meaning more meat, more dairy, more eggs, more ill health, more diabetes. We are working very hard, not just here, but in those countries as well, to change things. So there's a lot to do. And the team together, and when I say team, I mean you, who are participating with us, you're making this possible. So thank you so much to all of you for your contributions, for your generosity. There is a lot to do, but we are winning. We are winning day by day. We will keep you updated every Friday on our victories and also on our challenges ahead. So thank you for being with us. And back to you, Betsy.
Thank you, Dr. Barnard, and to Jill and to Kristie, and for all of you for joining us today. I'm going to give another plug for joining us on our 35th anniversary event, and it's happening on Sunday, December 6th. We've got lots of surprises in store. We've got a special musical performance by Moby. It'll be a ton of fun, and we want you there celebrating with us. So please go to pcrm.org/events to register and enjoy the weekend. We'll see you next Friday with another update on Mission Critical.